when I was working as a consultant for the Department for International Trade, and we were talking about agricultural technology when we were visiting countries overseas, it was very much about bringing together all of the different disciplines and all of the scientific strength that we have right across, agri-food, agri-tech, and so on. You touched on a really interesting, kind of, again, I talked right at the very start about the complexities of the agri-food supply network. And just picking up on one little paradox, on one hand, we want pollinators, and we're doing what we can to push, the viability of our pollinators. But at the same time, we're looking at vector-borne diseases, whether that is insects that are attacking plants or insects that, potentially carry viruses. I know for me, certainly as a vet, when I was training in the late 90s, there wasn't an awful lot of vector-borne disease in the UK at that stage. In the early noughties, we had both blue tongue and Schmallenberg, as examples of that. So again, I think you've covered a few really interesting pieces there. Riaz, just as we kind of move in now, we've only got about half an hour, but as I want to pick up on some of the really kind of key issues. One of the issues you talked about at the start was that, your body it looks at everything from processing through packaging, manufacturing, transport. What about this element of food waste? How much more can we be doing to research and change behavior around food waste?
Yeah, absolutely. I should have mentioned food waste because that's an absolutely essential part of the food system. There's stats around if food waste was a country, it'd be the third biggest emitter in the world. So huge challenges from an emissions perspective, and of course, from it rotting down, but also in terms of the waste of resources in producing it in the first place. So huge challenges. It's a live issue. It's something that we're looking at the moment, and it's, again, I would say, interdisciplinary. So depending on where you are in the world, food waste occurs largely at the consumer end in more developed countries, and earlier in the supply chain in developing countries. I guess in developed countries, I think there is something around consumer behavior, and I think in part that comes down to how much we value our food. And there is a school of thought that, if we were to pay the true cost, if we were to cover the externalities involved in production of food, and food prices went up, then a lot of food waste might go down because, it suddenly becomes a lot more valuable. So there is that aspect of it. But there's research, across the supply chain, looking at how you extend shelf life, for example, packaging, and those sorts of aspects as well. Absolutely critical, and food waste, throwing food loss as well in there as well, in terms of losses on farm to pests and diseases or abiotic stress or whatever that might be. A huge load of research that can be done across the food system, looking at those issues. So a vitally important issue and something that we're looking at the moment.
Yeah, no, that's good. I mean, obviously from my perspective, and I would imagine Ruth's as well, looking at sort of vets working with farmers to reduce, production diseases and things like that. But obviously, right throughout the supply chain, and we had a question came through just about less and better. Again, it's another one of those complex paradoxes that, how come the farming organizations and the veterinary associations are asking people to eat less? Well, it's about maintaining proportional spend and actually then looking at higher welfare, higher environmental, farm quality assured products and things like that. Again, you touched on that, Riaz. Can you expand just a wee bit more, and then I'll maybe go to Ruth and ask her to pick up from an NFU perspective just about less and better, because it does seem slightly counterintuitive that we're promoting UK farming, but at the same time we're promoting this kind of concept of eating less and better.
And yeah, I think it comes back to so if we take meat consumption, and it often comes up in that context. That at current levels, it's largely unsustainable. If we're over consuming meat, and and look at all of the environmental and health impacts that go alongside that, it's not sustainable. If we were to move to, say, better systems, and I think that's subjective, depends on your point of view, but higher welfare or better resource use or whatever it might be, lower emissions, it means producing less but better. And in terms of meat consumption, if we were to move to extensive systems, which is a possibility, the only way we could do that with the land that we have is to eat less but better. So back to what society wants and what it's willing to pay for, in my view.
Ruth, can you maybe sort of pick that one up as well?
Yeah, I would concur with everything that Riaz has just said, essentially. I think there's massive opportunities, particularly, I know public sector's being looked at the moment as to whether there's the opportunity to essentially offset imported product, but overall sort of reducing the spend on meat. I think that's a massive opportunity for sort of central government to be looking at that from a policy perspective, and something they could have direct influence on and sort of be championing within there. I obviously mentioned the dairy stat within my presentation around the productivity of sort of dairy cows. There's very similar statistics in relation to sort of meat within the UK, and obviously, as Riaz mentioned within his presentation, we have great swathes of the UK where the land is actually really only suitable livestock production anyway, and therefore from an ecological perspective and a biodiversity perspective, it's the best thing to be doing with that land anyway. So again, significant opportunities to offset imports. I think we just need to look at the sort of the value chain aspect of that and ensure that still stacks up from a financial perspective for UK producers. Or as to whether it's better to actually develop export opportunities to be seeking higher values, particularly when you're talking about certain parts of the carcass.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, again, even you're about to jump down another rabbit hole there, just about carcass balance, fifth quarter, how we use what we would previously have called animal byproducts, but actually, they are products, and how we can include them as part of a circular economy argument is really important as well. And just leading on from that, I'm kind of going to head off in a completely different direction. I mean, looking then at the carbon aspects. Grant, there's huge amount of interest at the minute within the livestock sector, particularly the ruminant sector, at using seaweed as an additive to help reduce methane output and that kind of thing. Where does the UK sit in relation to aquaculture for plants? I know your own specialism's more in and around sort of crustaceans and finfish, but in terms of aquaculture for plants, for seaweed, potentially as a feed additive for livestock, where do we sit at the minute in that respect?
Yeah, I think it's growing, isn't it? I mean, there's a huge interest in seaweed generally. I mean, most of the seaweed farming globally is occurring in Asia, and it's mainly in relation to red seaweeds, which are these sort of things like Kappa ficus, so these carrageenan and agar producing sort of taxa, which then are used for products. So, toothpaste and whatever else, and they go into pharmaceuticals and nutraceuticals and so on. So there's a big industry there. But I guess there's an expansion of interest in seaweed for carbon capture, for nutrient capture from catchments and that kind of thing. And there's a massive potential. And I think that there's two different markets there. One is the thing you just mentioned, which is using animal feeds and the benefits you might get for reduced methane production. I don't know anything about that area, but that's an interesting angle. The other angle is for direct consumption of them. They are pretty good for you if you grow them in the right places and so on. And I guess the other thing is in terms of seaweeds, there's an option then for using them to clean up environments, because they are capturing nutrients from catchments. So they're catching nutrients, but they're also capturing other things like microbes and other things that might be in water. So people are talking about using them in and around other types of farming, whether that's linked to terrestrial farming systems or even linked to to aquaculture, so fish farms. So how do you catch the nutrients coming off a fish farm, a salmon farm? Well, a seaweed farm or an oyster farm downstream from it could neutralize the effect. So I think we're going to see a big increase in seaweed. The other thing I would mention, just quickly before I finish, is that it's not necessarily a panacea for everything, because there have been some studies done that show that extreme nutrient stripping from marine waters, for instance, can kill coral reefs, for instance, because the coral reef needs nutrients for the algae to live in the, for the coral. So you've got to be careful of anything you do. I mean, wherever you do it, you can't just go, well, that's the solution. But I think it does offer some major benefits, and I think we'll see a lot more of it in the next 10 years, I would imagine.
Yeah, so it's everything in balance, and you're right, Grant. I think this kind of multi-trophic sort of systems and things that that are actually commonplace in other parts of the world, where you've got maybe livestock, aquaculture kind of working sort of closely together, finfish with plants and things, is a really interesting one. Tamsin, Kim asked one of the very first questions this evening, and I want to come back to it. And she asked about, while a lot of land is used for livestock, would you not accept that it simultaneously can be used for recreation, climate mitigation, adaptation, and just the landscape in itself? Yeah. So, I mean, clearly we don't keep livestock in fields, just to look nice. And there is a huge amount of talk, about the emissions that our ruminants, give off. But quite often we forget the fact that, that the grasslands, the uplands that they're on are huge carbon sinks as well. Yeah. Within the food strategy, was that something that was considered? I'll maybe come back and see if we can get a comment from Ruth on this as well.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. So very much so. So I think that often this debate gets slightly polarized. So, a previous question about does eating less equal an assault on British farmers, or, it's not oppositional. There's a lot of nuance in the debate, and there's nuance in our proposals. I saw one of the sort of comments saying, is this all, this is good for vegans and the vegan lobby. So I think that what we try to do through the National Food Strategy was to take some of those sort of debates about land sharing and land sparing and eating less or eating better, and try and understand the science that underpins it all and the perspectives of lots of different. We tested so much of our thinking with climate scientists, with farmers, with all sorts of people. So it wasn't just our point of view. This was, built on a lot of evidence and talking about things in the system. So we tried to go, so at the heart of that, and first question is, the sort of notion of multifunctional land use. And it's clearly that our land has got to do multiple things. It needs to feed us. We value it from an aesthetic perspective. It's got to support, play a contribution in mopping up carbon. It's got to play all sorts of different roles. And livestock systems have an absolute fundamental role to play in nature and biodiversity, low intensity grazing systems, pasture fed systems. So yes, when we talked about the 3-compartment model, it was very much to get beyond net sharing or sparing. It's not the sort of choice between the two. It's that there will be some parts of the land where we will need to intensify production to feed a growing population. There will be other parts of there will be other parts of the country that are better suited for a combination of land uses. And there are some parts around peatlands where we'll need to restore the peatlands, or plants and trees that will be a more monofunctional land use. And so it is not a one size fits all. We were very much embracing a sort of pluralist vision of the future of land use, in which livestock play a major role in it. And I think, picking on some of the points that Riaz and Ruth have made, is that there are different carbon intensities associated with different livestock production systems. Yeah. And there are opportunities through productivity and investments through methane additives and all the rest of it to balance animal welfare against our carbon emissions, but also, it's a sort of balancing act, and we have to take account of these different things, and science will play a big role in that as our understanding improves.
Ruth, would you like to comment on that area as well?
Yes, I can do, Simon. I very much try to focus on the positives of the national food strategy this evening. This is one area where we probably vehemently disagree with what was proposed within the report. We very much see that farmers need to have the potential to use the land in whichever sphere is most economically and also sort of biodiversity and environmentally sustainable, and that shouldn't be compartmentalised into one sort of box. Tamsin sort of added a slightly different perspective, I think, there in comparison to sort of the black and white of the report. But I sort of mentioned earlier about sort of a dual use in terms of livestock production and grazing, which is probably the type of area we're coming at, whilst understanding what Tamsin was saying in relation to sort of areas of significant interest such as peatlands. I think one thing I would say is this area is increasingly complex, particularly when you start looking at carbon sinking and carbon credits, and whether that should be associated to the land or the product that's coming off of them. Are we likely to start seeing going forward commercial businesses offering contracts where they're taking the sort of the carbon sink along with the product itself, whether that be some of the dairy contracts that they're out there or whatever it might be. They don't exist currently, but I think there's certainly something that companies are going to want to explore is how they're sort of taking that benefit all the way down the supply chain to their particular brand, and those three compartments that are sort of set out within the national food strategy, I think, are going to become increasingly blurred, and it's going to be challenging for farmers to kind of navigate their way within that.
So I think certainly a number of the speakers this evening have mentioned, the fact that it's about balance. Sustainability is about balance. It's a balance of environmental aspects, it's a balance of economic aspects, it's a balance of animal welfare, animal health, biodiversity in our landscapes, supplying the market at the right price with the right products that are required. Just to kind of take I suppose another move on, and I think we've pretty well closed off that it's a balance between plant-based diets and meat. It's a bit of both. Yes, people will have some choice as to whether they want to be vegan or vegetarian or flexitarian or complete carnivores at the other end of the spectrum. But ultimately, it's about promoting healthy, balanced diets and making sure that there is an availability of that, for everyone. Just to pick up, and I'm paraphrasing Andrew's question here, but he's talking about the use of perennial plants, including trees grown on the same land rather than just having sort of monoculture, grassland pastures. Again, Ruth, I think there is a lot of innovation there, and this kind of silvopasture and things. People are exploring different types of systems and regenerative agriculture type things. Do you want to comment a little, just briefly, on that? I'm conscious of your voice as well, but
yeah, and I'll be honest, Simon, this isn't an area of expertise for me at all. We certainly do have experts within the union on this subject area. I'm not one of them, but you're right. It's something that a number of farmers are looking at for more of what I'd call a historic regenerative agriculture type format. Whether that be herbal lays or for livestock, or as been suggested, sort of dual cultures in relation to trees and grassland together. I think there is a place for that, as Tamsin sort of touched on earlier, perhaps in certain parts of the country, and it will depend on what the output of that land should be and what that should look like. Certainly one of the things we've advocated in relation to our net zero pledge is particularly hedgerows, and what can you be doing to increase your hedgerows and be adding more sort of diversity in terms of cultures within there, and sort of tree planting being a fundamental part of that. I think the key is really looking at the output. So what is that achieving, and is that ultimately achieving what we're aiming for it to? So as I sort of mentioned, we need to look at the science and the targets and the output associated with that, as opposed to sort of planting any form of tree across the countryside. That really needs to be clearly understood what the best thing to do is. And farmers at the moment are crying out for that information and crying out to sort of be led in that direction as to what they can be doing best to meet that requirement.
And look, if I just slip in another, there's a question that's come in here at the end, just thinking about innovation and different types of systems. We've even got one here which is sort of suggesting about looking at methane capture from livestock and how that could then be fed into vertical farming systems. You know, again, there's but real interest in that area, sort of looking at, you know, LEDs and, you know, controlled environments and that kind of whole piece, again, reducing waste and so on.
Mm. So I don't know about carbon capture from animals. That might be slightly challenging and perhaps doesn't fit with some of the welfare aspects that we're moving towards. But I know there's examples as to where that's being done with glass houses already. So for example, the sugar beet factory, they're already sort of using the heat and the sort of gas that's coming off that site to feed into tomato and strawberry plants. I know over at Dyson, they've actually just set out something very similar as well at Dyson Farming, and are looking to increase sort of strawberry production from the UK and increasing the sort of seasonality of that very effectively. And again, that's sort of based on extracting heat and gas from a processing facility that's already in existence, and utilising that to grow something else. Fantastic to be doing that. What I would say is massive investment is required to be able to do that, which is why we've sort of been associated with these large brands such as Dyson and British Sugar. But that is something from an innovation perspective, you know, whether that be around grants, whether that be around direct funding, central government or whatever that might be, that is certainly something we should be looking at as a sort of nation going forward.
Riaz, maybe the next step is to come back to you and that sort of piece around innovation. I noticed that Ian Cox is also a former colleague, you know, involved in Innovate UK. So right across the, you know, the technology spectrum, you know, from very early stage fundamental research right through to things like vertical farming, you know, what role then does UKRI sort of play, you know, in that, you know, directing the funding to the right place in that respect?
Yeah, an absolutely fundamental role. You know, we're the biggest funders of research innovation, and we work with all sorts of communities to try and ensure that we're working on the challenges that matter most to people and to the industry as well. And I mean, it's right through from, you know, we've mentioned things like methane inhibitors, and you know, plant and livestock genetics, so the basic bioscience, right through to some of the environmental science around ecology, and bringing in some of the social science around, you know, behaviours and how you drive those, and business models, and those sorts of things, and then right through to the type of stuff that Innovate funds, but the BBSC funds some as well, and EPSRC, in terms of kind of hardcore technologies and what you might then develop. And then actually there is a program I didn't mention, which is called Transforming Food Production, which has a major focus on reducing emissions by 2040, and that's hugely technological, and they funded all sorts of things around vertical agriculture, turning methane into fish food, and all sorts of things around that. And that was a collaboration between Innovate and BBSRC and DEFRA, and they continue to work with this other important area, which is trying to ensure adoption of those technologies. You know, Ruth mentioned how great we are at dairy farming, and so what are the best practices and innovations that are happening that we can then spread everywhere, particularly across the UK but elsewhere as well. How do we do that? And there's new competitions being announced all the time around farmer-led research, and bringing that unique expertise to bear on some of these challenges and helping to direct the research in that way.
And Riaz, just to follow on from that then, you know, there is a question here from Craig, you know, mixed farmer in County Antrim, who's then talking about, you know, how we get, you know, those progressive practices and those ideas out to farmers. How do we ensure farmers can get better access, better education and training to help create a sustainable food system and rapidly tackle overexploitation of ecosystem services across the UK and Ireland? How do we then get that research into practice?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question, a very big question, and something we're constantly thinking about in UKRI is how do we get the research that we're doing, the evidence or technology out there to people actually using it in practice. It's a difficult question, but I think certainly with our programme on transforming the food system for healthy people and a healthy planet, a big driver for that was getting those stakeholders in the room and co-designing the research from the outset. So rather than going off and doing some research and saying, here you go and use that, please, actually getting those people in the room and in terms of those stakeholders, government and business and civil society are all in the room and in all of those consortia, helping to shape that research from day one. And the hope is that then they not only bring their unique perspectives, but they then use that research then further down the line. So I would encourage whoever asked questions at Craig to say to think about engaging with that process. And getting involved in research. The farmer-led research is another one. I think there's a huge scope for getting involved in that. And also just on the research side, we have numerous advisory boards. I'm always looking for people to get engaged, so particularly farmers. So if you're keen, I'm happy to hook you up with that. But I'm sure there are lots of other networks out there. The Farm Innovation Network, I know, are doing stuff, and there are others I'm sure Ruth's aware of.
Yeah, and I mean, if I could maybe just give a really quick plug to the 4 agri-tech innovation centres, again, collaboration between, our top academic institutes, our research institutes and industry, Agri-metrics on data, CL on livestock, Agri-Epi on engineering and precision solutions, and CHAP then on sort of plant and crop health in those areas as well. And Craig, definitely engage with us at Queen's, engage with CAFRE, engage with AgResearch in Northern Ireland. We've got the Beacon Farm Network now looking at sustainability, across farms in Northern Ireland as well. Folks, we're coming very close to the end, so I'm going to ask all of our speakers shortly, just literally in 30 seconds, to give us, your take-home message. But Tamsin, maybe just if I could pick up on one thing which has come out again here. It's been touched on about the stats around type 2 diabetes and obesity and the links with various types of cancer and with being overweight and so on. How do we get some of those key messages from the National Food Strategy out to the general public around, is it all about, and I know it within the report there's bits on sugar taxing and and so on. How do we get that out there? How do we get those key messages out?
Yeah, thanks. So I'll keep it really brief. So just before we published, The Sun ran a sort of article, and it was one of those leader articles that says The Sun says, and it was The Sun says, you want to get out of this crisis, you have to exercise, you deploy willpower, and educate or inform. And what we wanted to do, and that was not just, sort of, or, it wasn't just the Sun's view on things, it was a pretty entrenched view that with willpower and education and all the rest of it, we could fix this crisis in obesity. And what we wanted to show is that that won't work. That which is why we came up with this concept of the junk food cycle. Given that all of the profit is in selling Kit Kats rather than broccoli, and we have this natural propensity to like food that is high in sugar, fat and salt, you won't do it through those two things going. So you have to intervene in the price. You have to privately, the food industry said to us, we need government to lean in more to create a level playing field and all the rest of it. So there is not a single silver bullet. It will be a whole combination of factors, from a whole programme of changing our food culture, which is a long-term project, working with children, teaching them the skills to eat healthily, to intervening in the market to sort of shift the balance and incentive between healthy and unhealthy products.
Thanks, Tamsin. Of course, other chocolate bars and other brassica vegetables are available. So, look, just to kind of wrap up, Grant, tell me how one thing you would change about our food supply system.
I mean, I think I've said it earlier on. I mean, please let's consider the water and the things in it as part of it. So that's the really big message, because nobody really talks about it apart from us lot who work in water and the things we eat, even though we all eat quite a lot of fish and so on. The other thing I would say for that to happen is for people who are involved with farming on land to consider how they may do this. I mean, I think there's been a lot of narrative around my world about how fishermen and fishing communities, for instance, might turn their hand to aquaculture as part of that sort of aquatic food system. But farmers also have a potential to do this as well on their land, in their barns, in the sort of land they've already got, and that could also be help to sort of to diversify their systems and to create rewilding or whatever else is going to happen in their farms in the future. Shrimp farms on farms, they already exist in the UK on pig farms using waste, for instance, creating a very high value, very nice shrimp product that we like to eat. So think broadly about what aquatic means, and not just about it's out in the sea somewhere. It's not my thing.
Yeah, that cross-disciplinary piece. Ruth?
I think as a cohesive approach and not looking at things through one lens, probably bored of me saying that already this evening, but everything is so intertwined, and as a food chain, everything is so interconnected that it's very dangerous to be doing that and to be sort of pitching one product against another without actually all of the information to be able to do that. We picked up on meat versus protein alternatives. Actually, if you really delve into protein alternatives, there are huge issues, whether that be around water usage or whatever it might be within there as well. I think we just need to take a sensible, pragmatic approach and strip out the emotion from the development of policy. Very hard when we all love food so much.
Thanks, Ruth. Riaz, what are your final thoughts?
So I would say we need to think systemically about the challenge. There are no silver bullets, and there are always going to be trade-offs with any potential solution. So we need to think about multiple interventions across the system happening at the same time across government, business, and civil society, with us as citizens playing a role in that. And I think the one area I think we need to tackle pretty urgently is food environments, and making fruit and veg appealing, tasty, affordable, and again thinking systemically right back from what we're producing and incentivizing that to education, to labeling, to changing what manufacturers do, and right through to how we display foods in supermarkets and the choice that's available, to making it affordable and things people want to eat. So it's a whole systems issue.
Fantastic. Tamsin, you've got the final word.
I think it will be one of hope and optimism. What I've heard on the panel and through the questions is I don't think there's big differences about the direction of travel. We all want a food system that delivers nutritious, affordable food for everybody, but also is within planetary limits. So I think there's absolute unity on those goals. And, and I think we should be optimistic and take hope from that.
Fantastic. Tamsin, thanks very much.
There's more in common than that divides us, I think, is what I'm saying.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, just in drawing this to a close, I just want to leave you with a really short definition of sustainability that I quite often use in my presentations, and I think it originated with Newcastle University, and it is quite simply enough for all forever. And we want to improve our productivity, but it's about producing enough. It's not producing more and more and more. It's about producing enough, and it's for all. Okay, we want to have safe, nutritious food, accessibility for everyone, and it is forever. We have to be able to protect our planet for the next generations, and we have to be able to produce our food in a sustainable fashion. Thank you to all of our speakers, to Tamsin, to Grant, to Ruth, and to Riaz. We've had an absolutely fantastic, couple of hours. I'd like to thank Harriet McCara, Laura Marshall, Karen Patel, and Laura Bellingham at the Royal Society of Biology for all of the work that they've put into preparing and delivering our session this evening. And lastly, folks, thank you for all of you, to all of you for attending this evening and for your fantastic questions. Apologies we didn't get them all answered, but hopefully we had a really useful discussion and people were able to take something away from that. Folks, enjoy the rest of your evening. Thanks very much indeed.